Hey guys, it's me again. I'm on the last lesson for oceans. This is going to be a lot of review from fourth grade. It builds on to fifth grade, so just so that you know, this is kind of a built on. I'm doing two kind of skills at the same time. So it's a review, which of course you know that I'm assuming if we have the SOL test, then it would also be on there too because you have to know the materials from fourth and fifth grade. So just be aware of that. Okay, so today, let's kind of think about the things that we've talked about so far. We've talked about the ocean landforms, which is, if you remember, continental shelf, continental slope, continental rise, and abyssal plain. So kind of think about those and what details do you know about them. Then we have our ocean motion. Ocean motion are our three main ocean motions. I got a little bit tongue-tied there. We have waves that are formed by wind. We have currents that are moved by three things: temperature, wind, and salinity. And then we have currents, which are moved by that of temperature and ocean water. Tides. My third one was tides. Brain fart. Sorry. Tides are caused by the moon's gravitational pull. And then yesterday, the third lesson we talked about was that of ocean environment, which are affected by the depth of the ocean, the availability of food, and that of sunlight. So today, to move forth from the ocean environment, we're going to move into that of the ecosystem. Now, a skill that if you have to put your brain back into and get your brain ready is the word ecosystem. Ecosystem is a fourth grade word. And it continues you'll use it again in sixth grade, and you'll use it again in seventh grade, and again with Sister Weikle in biology, and possibly in ecology. So we use these words all the time. So it's going to get them in your head and you'll have them. Okay. All right. So ecosystem is the community of living and non-living things, or rocks, water, soil, and air. So that's going to include our plants and animals hanging out, whoa, yo, yo, with non-living things like rocks, water, soil, and air. And they work together. They live together and they rely on each other. All these populations of living and non-living components in the environment that interact together and they hang out together. You have to have, if you're a frog, you're going to have the water because your body needs the water. So you're going to interact with water to keep your skin moist. If you're a fish and you rely on that of the oxygen from the plants, you may even rely on the vegetation, meaning the plants that they eat. So each of them rely on each other. The plants rely on the sun, which is a non-living thing. The plants also rely on the soil, which is a non-living thing. So they all interact together. So living and non-living things that hang out together. So if you look here, this diagram's an ecosystem that you can look at. You can see the living and non-living things that are interacting together. Non-living things are going to be the things like the plants, the water, the soil, the air, the sun. Also, the living things that interact with those. These plants need that soil to get their nutrients. The plants need the sun to make photosynthesis. The fish needs the water in order to interact. So all of these things of living and non-living things interact together with each other. If you look at this picture, it's also in your notes. If you will look, the ecosystem is the bigger picture. Everything hangs out together there. And when we talk about then the habitats are within those areas of the ecosystem. And habitat is the home in which the organism lives, where they find shelter, where they find food, where they find their necessities. Just like the shelter of your home. Your home is your place where you find the shelters, your food, your water, and such. Community is where those organisms of living things interact. That's where the deer eat on the grass. They are interacting with the living organisms. Okay, so ecosystems, the living and non-living, habitats, the home, and the community is where those organisms hang out together, just the living organisms. Now, as we talk about ocean ecosystems provide a place for organisms to reproduce, live, and for feeding grounds. Now, we're going to be looking at what is an estuary. An estuary, where is the largest estuary? And how is an estuary related to watershed. Those are components from fourth grade. So now, as we look here, an estuary, and I'm just going to show you the picture first and then I will describe it. An estuary is where fresh water dumps into a larger body of water of salt. A fresh water, like the Potomac River, dumping into the Chesapeake Bay. An estuary is where a shallow area of fresh water and salt water that mixes together. So look back at this. So the definition is where fresh water mixes with salt water. This is an estuary where the ocean and the fresh water of the river move together and flow into each other. The combination of the fresh water and salt water is known as brackish water. There is a YouTube video that you can watch, and I will link it to Schoology. Now, this is the question. Where is the largest estuary? Our largest estuary in the world is that of the Chesapeake Bay. And guess what? You are a part of the Chesapeake watershed. Because the Shenandoah River, starting at Shenandoah National Park at the headwaters, dumping into the Hawksbill Creek, then dumps into the Shenandoah River and flows north. As it flows north, it dumps into the Potomac River in West Virginia, Harper's Ferry, which we talked about in Virginia Studies last year, where John Brown was. And that river dumps into the Chesapeake Bay as it goes past Washington, D.C. Now, how does a watershed and an estuary relate? A watershed is where a smaller body of water dumps into a larger body of water. So the smaller body of water is the river dumping into a larger body of the water, an ocean. So an estuary and a watershed are very similar to each other because it's where one dumps into another. Now, our rivers and our towns are part of those watersheds because they are related. As we look at watersheds and you think about this diagram, anything that's on this river here dumps into that. So if we dump some paint, some batteries, everything of those chemicals are going to be washing downstream. So it's important to protect our water system. Okay, the next ecosystem that we're going to talk about is that of tidal pools. Tidal pools are formed in areas where the continental shelf is covered and uncovered by water. If you remember, we talked about tides. Tides is the process where the moon pulls on the Earth's surface and bulges it forward. So that would be caused where the ocean would come onto the surface, onto the continental shelf, covering it and uncovering it as the moon's gravity pulls. The water gets trapped or left behind in the cracks. A great example of these are the rocky shores of the New England area. Tidal pools have most animals that are invertebrates, and later this year we're going to talk about what invertebrates are. Invertebrates are animals that do not have a backbone. So things like starfish, clams, lobsters, they have normally exoskeletons or shells that protect them from their prey or predator relationship. Starfish, also sea urchins, crabs, sea anemones, mussels, and periwinkles are all examples of invertebrates, animals that do not have a backbone. If you feel the back of your back, you will feel a rod that's going up and down your back. That means you are known as a vertebrate. You are not found in the tidal pool. Tide pools or tidal pools are filled with a variety of seaweeds such as sea lettuce, rockweed, and iris moss. These animals and plants must adapt to the living in harsh conditions, the crashing of water onto the surface, as well as the crashing of the changing in salinity and temperature as the tides move away and salt is evaporated, leaving more salt in the area. The drying effects and the crashing and changing temperatures. The third type of ecosystem, the ocean we're going to talk about, is that of wetlands. Wetlands are developed where fresh water or salt water meets lands, things like marshes, swamps, or bogs. In the south, we normally call them marshes and swamps. In the north, we call them bogs. Wetlands and marshes and swamps are usually located in the coastal areas where water is warmer. Marshes have small plants, reeds, and cattails. Swamps contain larger plants, trees, and Spanish moss. Bogs are located normally and the temperatures are cooler and much of the year. Now, another type of ecosystem we're going to be looking at is coral reefs. Coral reefs are the oldest and the most diverse on Earth. This ecosystem is full of biological diversity and beauty, meaning lots of varieties of organisms that live there. Reef systems serve as a barriers of protecting many coastal populations and storm damage. They support commercial fishing and they serve as a major tourist attractions, but it is the most threatened coastal ecosystem. People are gathering the coral reef and drying it and selling it for profit. This is causing much damage to that of this ecosystem, causing many of our organisms not to be able to adapt without the coral reef as their function. Now, we're going to be doing some more additional information. So, habitats is a place where kinds of places where organisms naturally live. An organism's habitat provides food, water, shelter, and place. The size of the habitat depends on the organism's needs. So it is H for habitat, H for home. Habitat's the home of a plant or animal where they find their food, water, shelter, and space. And depending on how much food, how much space, and how much water they need, their home will be bigger. Their habitat will be bigger. A community is all populations in one area, such as all the deer in one area, all the rabbits in one area, all the manatees in one area. It's all the living organism together. Again, an ecosystem is a community of living and non-living things that work together, and a population of living and non-living things that interact together. What is a habitat? These are some questions that you need to think about. What is a habitat? Why must organisms have habitats? What is a community? How is a community related to that of a habitat? What is a habitat? It's a home where they find their food, water, shelter, and survival. Why does an organism have a habitat? They need those things in order to survive. A community is the living organisms in one area. So a community is related to a habitat because this group of organisms live together in a community, but their homes are in separate places of the same organism. Niche. Got a niche for my itch. An itch, or a niche, is a specific job completed by an organism in its community or in its ecosystem. During its life cycle, an organism's role or job in the community, its niche, may change depending on what it needs. If you're in a bee community, then you have those specific jobs in the bees. There are worker bees who go out and get the nectar and look for pollen, and the queen bees whose job is to rule the hive in addition to also reproduce and hatch eggs. So each organism has a job or a role it needs. What is an example of a niche in a community? You may even have different roles like lions. You have the leader of the lion of the pack. You have a mother, a cub. Each one of them have their own job in the ecosystem or community. Is a niche important to an ecosystem? Explain why or why not. Niches are jobs. Each person in an ecosystem must have a different job. If everybody had the same job, then we wouldn't have all the things that need to be being taken place for it. So yes, niches are important in ecosystems, communities, as well as habitats. Think about your own house. The house has to have specific jobs for people to do in order for the home or habitat to run smoothly. So a niche, a job, is important to all ecosystems in order for it to smoothly run. Now I'm going to continue. You could stop here and go over ecosystems again, but also this time I'm going to be going over food webs, which is also a review, but also leans into our ocean unit. So ecosystems and niches and habitats are one part of the notes, and then I'm starting another set of notes on that of the food chain and food webs. So now we're going to be looking at food chains and food webs. Now, the sun's energy provides the ecosystem with the needed energy for the producers that are passed to the consumers and have the nutrients pools for decomposers. So sun is the energy that all living organisms need in order to survive. So sun is not a living organism, but it is the important component for the energy it needs. Now, plants, if you remember, we talked about in the ocean environment, are called producers. Producers mean they make their own food through the process known as photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, if you remind, get your brain juicy again, is where plants take in sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water and mix it all up and make oxygen for you to breathe and sugar for the plant, its food. So producers are are plants that make their own food through the process known as photosynthesis. The second organism that's living that's important to our ecosystem are known as consumers. Consumers are organisms that get their food by eating another organism. They consume, they get. The first consumer we're going to talk about is that of herbivores. Herbivores are plant eaters. They eat only plants. They only eat producers. Then we have what is known as carnivores. Carnivores are meat eaters. They only eat meat. And if you think about in this land ecosystems, that are going to be the organisms that have bigger, rougher teeth so they can eat the meat. Then we have what is known as that of an omnivore. O-M-N-I, is a Greek word that means all. They eat all, plants and animals. They eat both. Now, we have what is known as an important component, too, of another living organism in an ecosystem, and that is our decomposers. Decomposers is an organism that breaks down waste and the remains of other organisms. There are cleaners. They clean on the ecosystem in order to keep it clean. They live on poop. Yay! Clean up the poop. That's what makes it smell. It's the bacteria. Then that of dead organisms that die. They are the ones that go in and eat away at things and leave behind the carcass and skins and continue to eat on it. So it's a cleaner upper. So the decomposers are our cleaners. Now, if you go back, these are all review things that we talked about last year in 4th grade. Food web is a diagram that is a special diagram just for humans to explain what happens out in the ecosystem. It shows how energy is transferred or moved from one organism to another by eating. In a food web, energy is lost each time one organism eats another. Because of this, there has to be more plants than there are plant eaters because they provide the energy for plant eaters, herbivores. So as they eat, we lose energy when we're just sitting here. Our heart's beating, we're sweating, we're talking, we're breathing, we even go to the bathroom. That is energy that's lost. So in order for us to get that energy, we have to eat more. Food webs. In the ocean, there are different kind of organisms than on land. Plankton is our first one. Plankton are tiny, free-floating organisms that live in the water. We have animal plankton, which is known as zooplankton. Now think back. A zoo is where we go to visit animals. Guess what the small, microscopic, small organisms that are in the ocean that are called? Zooplankton. plankton. Zoo or animal plankton. Now, plant plankton, as we talked about in the ocean environment notes, is that of known as phytoplankton. There are producers. They produce their own energy through a process known as photosynthesis, and they make their food, and they are known as phytoplankton. Producers, the most abundant organism in the ocean. Phytoplankton is a plant-like plankton that carries out most of the photosynthesis on Earth, which means they give us most of our oxygen on Earth. Yay, phytoplankton! Therefore, they provide much of the oxygen on Earth. Phytoplankton forms the base or the start of all food webs and food chains. Plankton flourishes in areas where the nutrients is rich, and there is not from the deep areas. It is where the sunlight zone, where there's plenty of sun for photosynthesis to take place. We're reviewing again. Ocean consumers, herbivores, eat plants. Zooplankton, they are microscopic animals such as mollusks, clams, oysters, snails, some sea turtles, manatees, and fish. Omnivores, meaning meaning all, eat both plants and animals. Dolphins, crabs, lobsters, and sea otters are omnivores in the ocean. Carnivores eat only meat. They're the top consumers, meaning they have to eat a lot because they've lost a lot of energy. They have the least amount of energy of everything on the ocean because phytoplankton has the most energy. They're carnivores, eating very meaty things. Sharks, whales, octopus, seals, and otters. Some of them are very graphic on their meat eating. You probably have seen the sharks eating them. Yum! Food chains. All food chains and food webs always start with the producers, our phytoplankton. Producers have the most energy of all the food energy webs and food chains because all they have to do is sit there and suck up the sun and carbon dioxide. Producers are then eaten by herbivores. Herbivores then are eaten by either carnivores or omnivores. Carnivores eat either herbivores or omnivores. Let's do that again. All right, producers are eaten by herbivores because they eat plants. Now, herbivores, our plant eaters, are either eaten by carnivores, our meat eaters, or our omnivores that eat both meat and plants. So herbivores has two eaters. Carnivores are our meat eaters, eat our herbivores or omnivores. They only eat meat. Looking at producers go to herbivores, and herbivores are eaten by omnivores, and omnivores can eat by carnivores, but they also can be eaten by herbivores. Now, if you look here, the arrows are pointing toward the direction that the energy is moving. Of course, if I eat something, I want the energy. So this tells me that the zooplankton is eating the phytoplankton. The fish here is getting the energy from the zooplankton. This group of fish, known as schools, are sending their energy to the fish. And so as the energy is moved, how is the energy moved? It's moved in this direction. So it points in the direction that is who is eating it and who is getting the energy. Within a community, organisms are dependent on the survival of other organisms. That means they have to eat to survive. Energy is passed from one organism to another. Again, pay attention. The arrow is pointing toward who's eating it. This mouse is getting the energy from the corn. This owl is getting the energy from the mouse. Demonstrate on food chains and food webs. Look at this diagram here. What two organisms may be switched to make the food chain correct? Phytoplankton is eaten by a shark. Do sharks eat plants? Nope. I think we need to move the animal-like plankton over here to the phytoplankton and the shark over here where they are. Because a zooplankton is a herbivore that eats producers. This is an old SOL question. Now, looking at this food chain, where is the energy coming from for phytoplankton? The sun. The sun is where the energy is coming from. What organism starts the food web? What organism? Organisms mean living things. What starts it? It starts with the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton. Who has the most energy? The seal or phytoplankton? Phytoplankton, because all it has to do is suck up the sun. The seal has to go swimming and breathing and pooping and all that good stuff to make life. Now look at this. This is showing the direction again at which the organisms move. We start with the producers. They have the most energy, and the energy is moved to the zooplankton and then to the fish until this one. And then the shark has the least amount of energy of all. Now, that is 2 lessons in one. Yes, it was a long recording. You can stop after that of coral reef and go over those notes and then rest for a day and then come back and do food webs. And you've got several assignments to do with food webs, so make sure that you are reviewing over the notes each day as you go through it. It just keeps your brain juicy and full of knowledge. Knowledge is it. Knowledge is power. You got it. Powerhouse. Boom, boom, boom. 5th grade power. Love you guys. See you soon. Hopefully. Love you.